Let's bring in Katie Glueck. She's a senior political correspondent for McClatchy D.C. Katie, President Trump ran as a hardliner on immigration, but right now we see Republicans like House Speaker Paul Ryan calling on him to extend the Dreamers program. What kind of political implications or calculations does the White House have to take into account?
Sure, and it's great to be with you. So the calculations are twofold. On the one hand, as you noted, certainly there are many elements of the base that supported Donald Trump, that got him into office in the first place, that appreciated the very hardline approach that he took to immigration and the campaign. And of course, as we've discussed, he promised during the campaign to in fact end this program, talked quite a bit about deportations. But at the same time, we have heard from a lot of other people, including very prominent Republican lawmakers, many of them who often actually hold their fire when it relates to the president, coming out and saying just simply repealing this program is not the way to do it. You got to give Congress some space to figure out what the best next step is that maybe does include a more humane approach.
Yeah, and so we see Paul Ryan making that point, but Republicans in general haven't been pro-DACA here, so it would be kind of ironic if they were to come to the program's defense. Do we think there's a decent chance that this Republican Congress could overturn the president and preserve this program? We really think that might happen?
Well, what does seem to be clear is that there are a lot of members of Congress, including actually and significantly some Republicans, including some fairly conservative members of Congress, who would want to take steps to mitigate any action by the president that would potentially end the program immediately. So whether that's Congressman Kaufman from Colorado that would maybe try and force a vote on this, or some more conservative members who have talked about this, there is actually some disagreement on that front.
And what does mitigation mean? Does it mean that the people that already have their paperwork can stay, maybe just for the term of their paperwork or maybe indefinitely, but new folks won't get DACA?
Well, we have to see exactly what the president ends up doing on this and sort of what the language might be there. I mean, certainly one thing that's been discussed as it relates to one action that the president could take would be, possibly he ends the program officially, but lets people who do currently have work permits kind of serve those out. But then with some proposals that we're seeing from members of Congress would actually, and potentially have some bipartisan support, would allow the program to actually continue, some of these protections at least to continue for a little longer until Congress can reach some sort of agreement.
Katie, let's look at the to-do list that Congress has for September, which is very long. They have to approve a budget, raise the debt ceiling, and also pass some kind of relief package for Harvey victims. At the same time, the House only has 12 working days in September. The Senate has 17. Will there be any time for the Congress or White House priorities to work on tax reform?
Well, they're certainly going to try and make time for that, but you're right, it's going to be a very busy month that got even busier as Congress seeks to deal with and respond to Hurricane Harvey. That's injected a totally new dynamic into discussions around spending by the federal government, and actually it's taken some other spending priorities perhaps off the table.
Okay, the Washington Post is reporting that the president is walking back his shutdown threat if Congress doesn't fund the wall in September. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders talked about that Friday. We want to take a listen.
The president has said that if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall. Is he backing down from that threat now?
No, the president's still very much committed to building the wall.
Okay, still into the wall, but might not use it as a bargaining chip. Where do we think that stands?
Well, Hurricane Harvey has changed the political calculus on everything at this moment, and you would encounter a really difficult political dynamic if there is a threat of a government shutdown while a major American city is actually underwater, right? And so, the president is very interested in being able to be seen as a competent manager, someone who is able to come through in what is one of the biggest national crises to hit in his young administration. And so we are seeing all of Washington really turn their focus to responding to Harvey, and that supersedes debates over the border wall.
82% favor building the wall. Can he get away with not building it?
Well, he can get away with a lot with his base currently. There is really strong, almost unshakable support, according to some polls, with that slice of the Republican base that's very firmly in the president's corner. But no doubt that part of the reason they got there in the first place was, again, because of his rhetoric and his promises on immigration. So, I've spoken with some of them about this and about health care, which is also a core promise. And, of course, we haven't seen Obamacare repeal happen yet either. But what you typically do hear from sort of rank-and-file Republican voters and activists is, we've still got time on this. We think the president will deliver, and if he doesn't, there's much more inclination to blame Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan among rank-and-file voters than there is the president at this point.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Katie, CBS News is confirming that special counsel Robert Mueller is reviewing an early draft of the president's termination letter to James Comey, which in part laid out the president's frustrations over the Russia probe. Why might this letter be important in Mueller's investigation?
Well, it's potentially very significant, and of course we don't know the details of exactly what the president said, but the understanding is that there is a question of whether there was some obstruction of justice there, and to the extent this offers a more vivid picture of exactly where the president's head was at in the days before he fired Comey, that could potentially be quite significant.
Okay, we had these two different executive trips. We had Trump going, and then we had Vice President Pence going. And certainly Trump's critics, and some people that might not technically be critics, drew a contrast between Trump avoiding the damage, not showing empathy for the victims, and then Mike Pence doing the old Jimmy Carter routine and uprooting branches and
sleeves rolled up.
Yeah, exactly. So what do we make of this contrast and how the White House might address it when Trump returns to Texas tomorrow?
Well, Mike Pence certainly doesn't want anyone to think that there's a contrast, right?
Never.
No, of course. You know, there's been a decent amount of talk, of speculation over, you know, the last several months in particular about the extent to which there may or may not be any distance between the vice president and the president. That's a line of inquiry to which the White House pushes back very, very hard. They say that there is no daylight. It's just a question of, in a natural disaster kind of situation, having both men kind of working to full capacity and communicating as much as possible. But no doubt, the optics were certainly there that the vice president, in some of the activities in which he was engaging, really that rolling up the sleeves kind of movement, that was very much something that you might typically see a president doing. And so we'll see about the extent to which President Trump decides to follow that path as well. But of course, you know, he went to Texas as well, but his approach was maybe a little bit less hands-on.
Okay, Katie Glueck from McClatchy. Thanks so much, Katie.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much.